Yes, thank you so much. I'm just gonna go ahead and introduce her bio. Amanda is a researcher and advocate at the Human Rights Watch in the Children's Rights Division, where she specializes in youth justice. Her work focuses on developing effective strategies for reforming the ways in which U.S. states interact with youth accused crimes. She is the author of recently released report, I Just Want to Give Back, the reintegration of people sentenced to life without parole. Before joining the Human Rights Watch, Amanda led research efforts on extreme sentencing in California. She also worked as a human rights fellow at Columbia University, where she developed a human rights blueprint for the Obama Presidency Oral History Project. She holds a BA in Public Health and International Affairs from Princeton and an MA in International Policy from Stanford University, where she was a Knight-Hennessy Scholar. Okay, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that.
And just a short bio on the Human Rights Watch. So, Human Rights Watch investigates and reports on abuses happening in all corners of the world. There are roughly 550 plus people of 70 plus nationalities who are country experts, lawyers, journalists, and others who work to protect the most at risk from vulnerable minorities and civilians in wartime to refugees and children in need. They direct their advocacy towards governments, armed groups, and businesses, pushing them to change or enforce their laws, policies, and practices. To ensure their independence, they refuse government funding and carefully review all donations to ensure that they are consistent with their policies, mission, and values. And here today, we'll be hearing from Amanda from the Human Rights Watch. Amanda, go ahead.
Thanks, Audrey. Thanks, Marissa. It's so nice to be here. And I really, I just want to appreciate or thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to speak. I was really inspired by your organization and all the work that you all are doing. It really is just amazing to see youth like taking these issues up and going full steam ahead. So yeah, it's really inspirational. And I just want to thank you again for letting me be here. Yeah, I just want to make sure that there's like a lot of time where this can be a discussion and I can hear from you guys about what you want to hear about. But I think just really quick background, they asked me to just like prepare or just talk a little bit about my career and how I got to Human Rights Watch, along with the work that we do in our Children's Rights Division and like why youth are so important and how they're involved in our work. So I guess I can start. A lot of human rights activists, I think, probably have similar backgrounds, or at least for me, I've heard a lot when people ask, like, what got you into human rights? Like, why? Like, how did you choose this career path? And I think the answer is I don't really know. In some ways, I kind of stumbled upon it. I think there's a part of me that I always gravitated towards human rights issues, but I didn't realize that until looking back on it. Just when I was young, probably similar to a lot of you all, like feeling passionate about different issues and wondering why, in some ways, the world can feel so broken or that people can be so cruel to each other. And so from like my youth in middle school and high school, there were always, I think, streams or elements of me gravitating towards different issues. And then in college, when I started my undergraduate degree program, ended up studying policy, and I specialized in human rights. I remember I picked the concentration, and from that there were probably 30 different concentrations. And when I picked human rights, I remember just feeling, wow, like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Like, and it really changed, I think, the course of my education for those last 2 years. I really liked at Princeton, they gave you the freedom and the flexibility to study different areas because you don't have a lot of exposure before college. And so once I like settled on human rights, I think the whole rest of my education was like through this lens of human rights. And it was really amazing to be able to, my economics classes and sociology and psychology, they all were united by me looking at it through the lens of like, what does this mean for human rights? And it gave me just a really broad perspective, and I think made me even more passionate about it. And at that point, I think I'd always thought about and wanted to work on human rights issues internationally. So I'm from the United States. And I think I thought about going into maybe the international humanitarian aid field or working kind of in an arena like that. And it was actually just in my personal life that I was really involved in different initiatives for prison reform. So at Princeton, we had an organization called Students for Prison Education and Reform. So SPEAR is the shorthand for it. And I was really involved in this group on campus that I think just exposed me to a lot of issues within our criminal legal system. And that was the first time where I felt something that I felt really passionate about working on, but it was just more in my personal life as I kind of started taking this career trajectory towards what I thought was an international human rights field. Yeah, and then from there, when I graduated, a lot of my work in undergrad was informed by lots of Human Rights Watch reports. So Human Rights Watch was this organization that I'd run into often whenever I was looking into like women's education in Afghanistan or working on like refugees from the Rohingya crisis in Myanmar. Like there were all these different human rights issues I focused on in college, and consistently Human Rights Watch was always the organization whose research informed my research. And so I think I held it to, I had a really high esteem for the organization, and it was something I always dreamed of working for, but I found it really hard to get into the door when I graduated. I think a lot of college grads run into that. You feel you've had this amazing all of these years of education, and then when it's time to go into the real world, it can be kind of hard to break in. And so I found that, and I ended up actually working in a position with Human Rights Watch. I applied to lots of different positions, and the one I ended up getting was in our development department, which is the fundraising. So the way that nonprofits work, you guys probably know, like you were talking about donations, when you're run as a nonprofit, you have to have all of your money come in some way, but from fundraisers who are raising the money. And for me, it wasn't necessarily a position within like the international human rights, humanitarian aid work that I was thinking about doing, because that's also not the type of work that Human Rights Watch does, but it was a way for me to get to understand the nonprofit realm and how an organization like Human Rights Watch functions and works and what the engine that makes it go. And so for me, it was kind of my step into the door, and it was more in the back end. Like not a lot of people see what the fundraisers do behind the scenes, but for me, it was really eye-opening, and it was great to learn just how the organization functioned. Yeah, and from there, I ended up leaving to go to graduate school at Stanford, and that's when I dove more into the human rights policies that I would end up working on coming out of grad school. But one of the things that I really benefited from having that work experience before going to grad school, because it informed what I was learning about when I was in grad school, and it was very applicable, and I had like tangible ideas of what does this look like in the real world. And this is also around the time when I started shifting and realizing what I feel about what's going on in my home in the United States in our criminal legal system is something that I think I want to work on full time. So not leaving and going to try to help other countries, which I want so many people to do as well, and people in my organization are working on countries all around the world, but working just in my own backyard. And that's kind of when I stumbled into youth justice, and the team that I worked with was incredible. They have been working on the issue specifically in California for the past over 15 years, and my mentor, my supervisor, Elizabeth Calvin, she is incredible and has been doing this work, has become a just beacon of light and advocacy in California when it comes to youth justice. And so I got to like really learn under her. And then as I came out of grad school, this position opened up as a researcher and an advocate. And I came back to Human Rights Watch, and that's what I've been doing over the past year in this new role. And I guess, yeah, that can transition. I don't know, also Audrey, just step in whenever you want to ask questions, but just giving a brief overview. I guess this is not so brief, but my role, I kind of wear two hats. So I'm a researcher and an advocate. So the question I get asked most often is like, what do you do? Like, what does your work look like on a day-to-day basis? And the easiest way to explain it is with those two hats. So as a researcher, what we do as an organization is investigate human rights abuses all around the world. I'm in the Children's Rights Division, which means I have maybe 12 to 13 other colleagues who are doing amazing work all around the world on different issues having to do with children's rights. So children's education, child labor, children in armed conflict, really so many different issue areas that they're working on in many countries. My area of focus is children that are in conflict with the law here in the United States. And actually, one of the things that is really amazing about our work at Human Rights Watch, and I think part of what makes our research so powerful, is this intersection of being able to have people who are experts in certain thematic areas. So for instance, I'm in the Children's Rights Division, but we also have a Women's Rights Division or a Disability Rights Division or Health and Human Rights, all different areas of human rights. We have researchers who are experts in those areas, along with researchers who are experts in different parts of the world and areas regionally. That is where they have their expertise, and the intersection of those two, knowing what children's rights looks like around the world, along with knowing what it looks like in a specific context, is part of what makes our research so powerful. So on the research side, our research is largely qualitative. So that involves going into, or whatever issue that you're researching, figuring out what it actually looks like on the ground. So for me, I think one of the issues that I am working on right now is the issue of youth being transferred from the youth system to the adult system in the United States. And so part of what that would look like, say, on my research hat, if I were going into a state and say that we decide we want to release a report on youth transfer in a state, the research side would involve going and talking to every single person involved. Well, I guess not every single person, but someone who would give us a good look at what's happening. So the youth themselves, like who are being transferred, what is their background? Where are they coming from? What are their stories of what it looks like for them to be transferred to the adult system? Their attorneys, the prosecutors who are prosecuting them, the judges, the police that have arrested them, like every single area, their family members, maybe if they came from the foster care system, people from the foster care system or advocates who are just kind of make up this landscape of how did this child, who is a child under the age of 18, end up in the adult system. And from there, we're going to try to paint a picture in our research of what is happening. Like, are 13-year-olds in this state being transferred to the adult system? Why? Like, what is the mechanism? Are prosecutors sending them there directly? Are judges waiving them to the adult system? Is it just the state's laws that allow them automatically to be transferred or treated as adults? And really trying to figure out what is the problem and like where is it coming from? Because the only way you can begin to solve the problem is if you have a really good, firm, and fundamental understanding of what the problem is. And from there, we would do this research, talking to people in the community, letting the voices of those who sometimes have their voices suppressed be put out into the open. We document those abuses. So through the research process, if we were writing a report, we would write this up in a report that I think when Marissa was reading my bio, one of the things I just authored one of my first reports at Human Rights Watch which had to do with the reintegration of people who were sentenced to life without parole. And I can put a link in the chat if you guys want to see like what an example of one of our reports is, if that would be helpful. But releasing that report, and then my day-to-day then after the report is released is working with journalists to try to get the message out there, or working with the people who we interviewed to make sure that they have avenues to speak about the issue, or lots of things, trying to figure out before we get to the point of my other hat, which is advocacy, just kind of laying the foundation for what will set up our advocacy. Then putting on my other hat as an advocate, how do we mobilize and use this work and our body of work, not just this report that we've created, but everything else at our disposal, and like the tools in our toolkit to actually make change in what's happening. So if youth are being transferred and we want to stop the transfer in this particular state, what is the best means of doing that? And the answer to that question can largely be informed by our research. But from there, a lot of our work involves working with policymakers, or starting from the very beginning, drafting bill language to work with a legislator who might sponsor the bill to try to change laws that will have a direct impact on the children that are affected. And yeah, mobilizing and working in coalition with other organizations, with activists, with advocates, with people from the community, with bringing all the people to the table that need to be there in order to try to get consensus and to persuade lawmakers to make legislation that is in the best interests of youth. So yeah, I think the day to the day changes depending on kind of what season we're in, what our strategy looks like. But those are just like some ideas, general ideas of kind of the work that we do. And it looks different across the organization just because there's so many different issue areas that we're working on. And some of my colleagues are working on international treaties and bodies because they're working on like the overall human rights landscape from country to country and trying to find ways of holding governments accountable. This is just what it looks like in my context here in the US. And I think lastly, I just want to, I guess, wrap up before if you guys want to have a question and answer session with just talking a little bit about how important youth are in our work. And I think on the one hand, one of the key pillars of our work is that we want to make sure it is always informed, guided, and led by people with lived experience who are the experts. They are the foremost experts of like what is needed to change these systems. And like I think one of the things that is just, I think, so important is to always have that at the forefront. Because when you make sure that their voices are what is leading our work, that is how we know that we are in step and that we are not just kind of going off and trying to do our own agenda or push anything. That is most important for us. And so I think often the youth that are affected are the ones who should be at the forefront speaking, and who we are just have a platform or we have resources. We just want to come hand in hand and use those in whatever ways that is important for them. So I think there's the side of youth with lived experience who are directly impacted by some of the issues that we're working on, but also one of the things that I love is like being in coalition with these youth. And I think a good example is a bill that we're currently working on in California right now, having to do with the closure of youth prisons in California. One of the organizations that is in our coalition is called California Youth Connection, CYC, and we meet weekly. So our coalition is working on passing this legislation. Every week we have meetings. And even just this past week, we were in meetings with legislators and youth from CYC. This organization was also similar to you guys, is a youth-led organization. They are partners and co-sponsors on this bill. And in each of the meetings, at least that I was in, some of the youth from the organization were there speaking to the legislators or the legislator staff on why this bill is important and why they would like the legislators to vote in favor of this bill that we're working on. And I think just seeing this in our democratic process is like it again, like why I'm so inspired by you all is youth voices are just so important and so powerful because they are the only ones who've been in these youth facilities. And how can we come and try to change things when we don't know what it's like to be in there? And so to have them advocating and being the best advocates in these meetings, it is really powerful. And you can see it in the staffers when they're listening to the youth speak. I think for them, it's really powerful. Like, yes, this legislation is meaningful and it has real life implications. And this is a youth who's been involved and is telling me exactly what it's like. And when you're making legislation and seeing how it really impacts lives, I think that's really important. And yeah, I think that is just a really high level overview of some of the work that we do, why youth are so important. And yeah, I'd love to just open it up if you guys have any questions or if there's anything else that you want me to talk more about, I would be happy to. But yeah, thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much for speaking to us and for giving a kind of background on the work that you do at Human Rights Watch. Throughout this summit, we've kind of had this idea of nothing about us without us floating around, how no work can be truly done until we have the voices that have been directly impacted involved. And like you talked about with incarcerated children and things like that, having us in those spaces is super important, and making sure that directly impacted people are at the forefront of any activism always. So I kind of wanted to talk to you more about working in social justice, where everything is a bit heavy and you take on these cases that are very personal many times. So can you talk about what it's like to kind of almost have to desensitize yourself to things like that, and making sure you can go through with that load, and how do you deal with working with such personal cases?
Yeah, Audrey, that's a really good question. And it's one that I think a lot of people at the organization get often. And as in recent years, I think the organization has realized how um, important that is, and our mental health. It can be, when you're working with, I think, human rights abuses, some of the just the depravity of humanity, it can really weigh on you. There's what they, I think, call secondary trauma, just even from not experiencing the human rights abuse yourself, but like listening to the stories over and over again. That's been a key emphasis of the organization, is making sure that they are pouring in resources to make sure that we are supported, and that they've been doing, I think, a great job of that. One of the things we have is access to an in-house counselors. So it's free of charge. We can always talk to mental health professionals within the organization, but they also allow us, if you want to see your own provider, so much support to make sure that you have those avenues to talk about it, and that you're not bottling it up. And so there's the support organization, which I think is great. For me, I think the work at times can be really sad and heartbreaking, devastating to see just the way that we treat children. And the thing that I think gives me hope, though, and keeps me, I think, not so sad and just depressed about the circumstances, is the youth themselves, or the people that are impacted. It's actually funny. I work in our children's rights division, but the majority of the people I work with are older. They're in their 40s, 50s, 60s, because they were sentenced as youth, but to extreme sentences. So they've been in prison for 25, 30, 40, 50 years. And on the other hand, like, you would think that of years of being in the conditions of our prisons here in the US, that it would just wear on you, and almost completely deplete like your humanity. But they are the most human people I've ever met, the most wonderful, compassionate, inspiring. Like, I do not say this at all lightly. They are my favorite people in the world, and they've shown me like what it looks like to truly love your neighbor, and um to to just walk in a way where you don't take life for granted, and you are just, I don't know, it's so beautiful. And I think I always, it's my screensaver on my computer is a photo that is just a lot of the people I work with, and I see it every single day, and it reminds me every day why we're doing the work that we're doing, and how amazing these people are. And for me, that just, it gives me hope, and it's something that it really keeps my spirits up.
Thank you so much for that answer. It just, knowing that you're working directly with people and being able to see the individuals that are impacted by the policies you create, or the things that you're working on, is really amazing. And I think that's a big draw for kind of working in social justice or any sort of activism. So another question we kind of wanted to ask you was, sorry.
No, no worries.
This is from the chat. This is from our director of finance at JP, Stephen. So he wanted to ask about promoting fundraisers on a national level, because JP is a nonprofit and we've worked with raising funds, but it's been kind of hard. So we wanted to talk to you about your experience with it.
Yeah. And okay, take what I say with a grain of salt, because it's been a while since I've worked in fundraising and the development side. But I think that, and this is on just raising funds at a national, like, you guys are, where are you all based, or are you guys kind of all spread out?
We're all over America, some in
Yeah.
Colorado too, but that's a different story.
Yeah. So I think that in and of itself could potentially be a strength, just having people in different areas. It gives you access to so many other potential, I guess, funder bases, and finding ways to just see how you all's mission and your values align with what other funders are funding. And I think organizations, if you can look through find an organization, or like a foundation that maybe is granting money to organizations that are similar to you, and doing the work to look through what are the organizations that they fund, what are similarities, how can we find ways to show that the work that we're doing is meaningful, and aligns with their goals and their interests, because there are so many funders out there. I think the hard part is just narrowing it down, and then coming up with ways for you all to work together in like the different areas that you are, maybe just like breaking it up. I can put you in touch with some of our team that is working on development now, because it's been a really long time since I worked on that. And let me know if you want me to do that, and I can, maybe they will have better, more concrete advice or help for you guys.
That would be amazing. Yeah, thank you so much. I think I want to relate a few questions back to your background because I know we've talked a lot about your work that you've done now at the Human Rights Watch and how you've kind of gotten there. But I'm a little curious about some of the work that you did with the Obama Presidency Oral History Project. I know I looked a little bit more into that earlier and I found it very interesting. And I was wondering if you could talk maybe more about how you got into that project and what that was like for you.
Yeah, sure. So that's such a fun memory to think about doing that work. So it was actually while I was in graduate school. So it was just for a summer that where at Stanford, like in the summer between your first and second year of your master's program, you go and work on, you do anything having to do with policy work. Um, and this came out actually, one of my professors from Princeton was working on this on the Obama presidency, like oral history project. And it just kind of happened by chance that we came across, and as it was the summer that I was looking for work, and it ended up being such a great opportunity, because I realized I never actually heard of an oral history. So I don't know if you all are really familiar with oral histories, but often it's a way of documenting history orally. I guess that sounds pretty straightforward, but typically presidential oral histories have focused on people in power, right? So if Reagan or Nixon, if like while they were in power, it would look at all of their top level officials who were making all the policies and governing the United States during that time. The Obama's project was really unique because instead of just looking at the people at top level power, they wanted to look at everyone. They wanted to look at the people on the ground, which they felt was really in line with what Obama felt during his presidency and was indicative of who he was as a president. But like, not just what are the policies we're passing, but who are the people that are being impacted about this, and what do they have to say about how this has impacted their lives. So when you're working on policy, it can sometimes be easy to change policy, but you don't necessarily know what's going to happen, and like what that looks like in the lives of individuals. And so that was a key component of this oral history. And one of the things that I think that was really cool was, like, as I was learning about oral histories, is that I realized it was so similar to human rights interviews. And so some of the same things that you think about when you're conducting a human rights interview and getting informed consent and trying to hear about a person's personal experience or lived experience of their life is almost the same as interviewing someone and listening to how they recount history for an oral history project. And so that was one of the things I think that really drew me to the project, and what made it such a cool summer, is like seeing another way of just humanizing stories and talking to people to see, like, when you hear about a policy that affects thousands of people, or a human rights abuse that affects thousands of people, sometimes those statistics can get lost. And that's, I think, part of the powers of us as humans, is like speaking and sharing our stories. And there's just so much value in that. And so I saw a really cool intersection there, and that's part of what made my time at Columbia really, really amazing.
I definitely agree with that. The idea that sometimes when you see a statistic, it doesn't feel real. I feel like so oftentimes the news is so sensationalized that we see a statistic or we see like, oh, there's another event that's happened, and we're kind of just like, oh, that's another thing flying by our radar. But it's really impactful, I think, when you do those kinds of oral histories or those kinds of stories and you hear from the people themselves and how it impacted them. So thank you for sharing. And kind of on that same vein, what are some of the resources that you like to read or watch, podcasts, books, some of your favorites that have kind of helped in that same idea?
Yeah, it's actually so funny. I am not a podcast person. I wish I was so badly, but I don't know if it, like, I'm a 9 hours of sleep type of person. I sleep a lot, and I don't know if there's something about just audio. Like, it's the same with audiobooks. I can't listen to audiobooks or podcasts because I just, for some reason, start drifting off to sleep. But I think a lot of the work that I haven't had a lot of pleasure reading, or I realize it's so weird working in a job that what you do, you're so passionate about, and like what you normally would read in your free time and like what is something that is enjoyable for you is what you're reading for your work. So I think, for instance, on this last report that I was working on, it had to do with life without parole here in the US. And one of the books that I read that was so helpful for the research was it's by Christopher Seeds, who's a professor in California, and I think it's called Death by Prison. And it was just one of those things where I think I was reading through the book and I was like, wow, I cannot believe that I get paid to read this, like something that I would love to read in my free time. I feel like it's like I feel so lucky to be able to be in a job that where I do that. But yeah, I'm so sorry that I don't have more podcast recommendations, but that's an example of, I guess, of like one of the books I've read recently for this report.
Okay, awesome. I just want to rewind a little bit. You know, you talked a lot about your work with youth, and I just truly want to applaud you for everything that you mentioned because it was extremely powerful, and I could see how passionate you are about it. Something that we tend to do a lot is forget about young people in a lot of different spaces, even though, you know, JP has helped donate 10,000 menstrual products to prisons, or I saw another organization that mobilized 8.4 million young voters to get involved with like the 2020 election. So, you know, going off that, what are some ways organizations like ours that focus on youth and were run by youth can get involved with the Human Rights Watch?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, the way that I got connected to you guys was through our one of my colleagues who works on what's called our Human Rights Watch Student Task Force, STF. And so this is a program within Human Rights Watch that it's a youth leadership training program. So they empower high school students to try to become human rights advocates. And I think they work with students and even teachers on different campuses or at different high schools around the country. And even I think they're starting to spread internationally, or they have lots of Zoom meetings. And so I think that's a way that to get involved is through this task force. But yeah, they just give training, and they have throughout the course of being involved in the task force, you can get access to different Human Rights Watch like materials, or some of our experts, some of our researchers who will do calls with the students, and they give them the tools to try to help equip them and their peers and school administrators and local communities just to be involved and be human rights activists within each of their communities. So yeah, I think that's one way, is like it's a concrete, tangible way. I think it's always nice to be able to have it like a checklist to do, but they have students from different campuses that engage individually or as a group, like they kind of make student groups within schools on campus. And then they have, I think, weekly Zoom meetings where you can learn about human rights and plan events and advocacy for their campuses. So I can actually, I asked our task force manager for the like a link, and I'll put a link in the chat for how, if you want to join the student task force, you can do that here. And yeah, so that's, I think, one way. Yeah. And I'll also put a link to just more about what the student task force is.
And thank you for that answer. And throughout the summit, we've had a variety of speakers, and we wanted to ask you more directly about how there's no really one true path of getting into social justice or becoming an activist or working in that sphere. So how do you kind of deal with not knowing what your total end goal is or where you're going to end up, but knowing that the things that you're learning along the way will help you in some way? So just talking about sort of how do you take this path and know that you're going towards something?
I think that is like a really beautiful and almost philosophical question, Audrey. I think one of the things I loved at Stanford, I was a part of this fellowship program. And when I was applying to the fellowship, one of the questions that they ask, or it's not even a question, it's a sentence, they say, connect the dots. And I think it links to a commencement speech that maybe Steve Jobs gave at Stanford one year, of him just talking about his background and how each of those dots ended up like painting the picture to where he ended up. And it was a really hard question to tackle, because I think oftentimes as we're going through things, we don't necessarily see how they fit into an end goal, or if there's somewhere we're going, or maybe what happens for a lot of us is we don't know where we're going, like we don't know what the end goal is. And so as you're just trying to figure out just life and like your friendships and your family and your career and your education and everything having to do like with what makes us humans and like what makes us like go through the day each day. It can be so confusing and overwhelming. And I think one of the things that I realize is that it's so beautiful to look back and realize you don't always have to have everything doesn't have to be calculated. Like as we're living, we're just learning, and things that I had no idea would impact what I'm doing today, maybe in the smallest ways have. And people that I've met, or like maybe stories that I've heard, just the way that you think about your life and like where you're going. I think one of this, you weren't really necessarily asking for advice, but something I would advise you guys to do is to not like every experience that you have, don't never think about it as like a step backwards, because I think that can be something that's like naturally, as say that you wanted an internship or a fellowship or somewhere that you're going and you didn't get it and you ended up somewhere else, or you ended up in a job that you didn't necessarily isn't necessarily what you wanted to do. All of those experiences are learning experiences, and they make up like they will contribute to like who you're becoming in some way. And so as you are going out into the world and coming across different opportunities, just yeah, just try to think about, what am I learning here? And then I promise, looking back on it, it will make sense in some way. Like the dots will connect somehow, and you, I don't think there's any way to necessarily foresee how that will happen. But yeah, it's I think something that we're all doing and that I will be doing for the rest of my life. And yeah.
I think that's some great advice, and I think that's something that I feel like should be stressed a lot more when it comes to learning, because I mean, I've seen a lot of people kind of this is something that was discussed yesterday in the panels too, where it was like learn from your failures and make them your future successes. And I think that's a good piece of advice, because I feel like a lot of times people are so set back when they make a mistake and they think that they can't improve from it, but I feel like that's almost the best way you learn, and I think that's exactly what you're discussing. Um, and kind of in that same vein, what is like one thing that you would say you want everyone from this talk to take away, like the best piece of advice or the best thing that you could share with us today?
Oh man, I feel like this has not even been like that helpful for you guys. This is more just, I think, about our organization and like how I kind of ended up stumbled into it. But I guess I think the one takeaway would be to just like that you guys are amazing, and like that really like keep doing the work that you're doing. It is so inspiring and it makes a difference. I think sometimes like this field can just feel so like we kind of were talking about earlier. It just feels hopeless at times, but like you guys are hope. Like you guys are what gives me hope. And just yeah, keep doing what you guys are doing, because it's really 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 amazing.
I think we can say the same exact thing that to you guys about Human Rights Watch. I know that I've actually personally used your resources during like Model UN or just outside, and knowing that there are organizations out there that are so focused on making sure that their donors are ethical, or that there's that they kind of embody the spirit of being a nonprofit, is super amazing. And just thank you so much for speaking to us about your work today and being an amazing keynote speaker. You've kind of set the tone for today. And if anyone has any last minute questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Neha, do you have anything else to add?
I don't think it, oh, sorry. Oh, there we go. I don't think I have much else, but again, thank you so much. I guess a concluding note would be, where can we see your work and where can we keep in touch with you?
Yes, do you guys have my feel free to send my information to any of you guys as members. You have my contact information, but I'll also put a link in the chat again to the report I mentioned that we just published, which is my first report with Human Rights Watch. But yeah, I so like I said, I really am so inspired by you guys, and I want to be a helping hand. And so whenever I can be of assistance in any way, please don't hesitate to reach out. But again, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you guys, and yeah, I'm looking forward to just seeing the amazing things that you guys can continue to do.
Thank you so much once again, and I want to reiterate everything Audrey said. You've definitely set the tone for today, and I'm sure we'll keep that energy up. So thank you for joining us, and it was amazing having you.
Thanks guys.